By the year 2075, the map of our world could look very different, not because of wars or political change, but because of water and heat reshaping the places we call home. Entire regions, now bustling with life, may face a future where living there becomes nearly impossible. This isn't a vague warning, it's a pressing timeline. And for millions, that deadline is coming far sooner than expected. From rising seas to extreme heat waves, the planet is quietly sending signals that some of its most populated and productive areas could become unlivable. Human civilization has thrived within a surprisingly narrow climate niche for thousands of years. Think of it as our species' Goldilocks zone, conditions that are just right for survival and productivity. But according to a major study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, if greenhouse gas emissions continue on their current path, huge portions of the planet could be pushed outside this safe zone within the next 50 years. This forecast isn't speculation, it's grounded in data from NASA, the United Nations, and multiple climate research institutions. The two main drivers of this transformation are rising temperatures and encroaching waters. Some regions will face deadly heat, making human survival extremely difficult, while others may literally be swallowed by the sea. Today we'll be counting down 10 regions where these changes could make life nearly impossible, starting with areas that may seem surprising, and moving to those facing the most extreme threats. From shrinking islands to sweltering plains, this is a look at the places most at risk in the next half century. Let's start with a place you might not immediately think of when imagining climate danger: the United Kingdom. While it won't turn into a desert, its greatest vulnerability lies in the very waters that surround it. Rising seas pose a serious threat to England and Wales, where coastal defenses may struggle to keep pace. By 2075, projections indicate that even a sea level rise of just 0.35 meters could increase the frequency and height of water overtopping seawalls by as much as 50 to 150%. Right now, roughly 17% of the UK's coastline is already eroding, and in some areas, 28% of the coast loses more than 10 centimeters of land each year. Iconic cliffs and seaside communities could face dramatic changes, with entire villages at risk of being washed away. This is a hypothetical but plausible scenario, based on current trends and scientific modeling. If nothing changes, storms and high tides could combine with rising sea levels to transform these familiar coastal landscapes, creating a future where some areas may be increasingly difficult or even impossible to inhabit safely. Crossing the Atlantic, the outlook becomes even more serious along the southern coast of the United States. Cities like New Orleans and Miami face a double threat from rising seas and the gradual sinking of land in some areas. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, projects that sea levels along U.S. coastlines could rise by 10 to 12 inches by 2050, which is just 25 years from now. That might sound small, but even a rise of that scale could transform minor flooding events into frequent disruptive hazards. Areas that once only flooded during extreme storms could see water spilling over roads and into homes on a monthly basis. Miami in particular struggles because its porous limestone foundation allows seawater to seep inland, affecting freshwater supplies and destabilizing infrastructure. This combination of rising water and sinking land could turn once thriving communities into zones that are increasingly difficult to live in safely. In this hypothetical scenario, routine daily life might involve constant preparation for floods, with some neighborhoods becoming all but uninhabitable. While adaptive measures like seawalls and pumps can help, the sheer scale of the threat underscores how quickly familiar landscapes could change under relentless pressure from climate-driven sea level rise. Moving to Southeast Asia, the Mekong Delta faces one of the most serious water-related crises in the world. This fertile region, home to tens of millions of people, sits barely a meter above sea level in many areas. By 2075, rising seas combined with land subsidence, caused by groundwater pumping and upstream dams, could submerge large parts of the delta. Ho Chi Minh City, the economic heart of southern Vietnam, already contends with regular flooding, and the problem is projected to worsen dramatically. Vast areas of rice paddies and urban neighborhoods could be underwater, threatening food security and displacing millions of residents. Scientists warn that without massive intervention, the delta's land area could shrink significantly, creating one of the largest climate-driven migration crises in human history. In this hypothetical disaster scenario, communities would face both temporary and permanent displacement, while essential infrastructure, including roads and bridges, would be repeatedly damaged by floodwaters. The combination of rising seas, sinking land, and disrupted river flow illustrates how quickly a densely populated region can approach uninhabitability if current trends continue. Next, we head to the Maldives, a nation famous for its turquoise waters and coral atolls. This archipelago is the lowest lying country on Earth, with more than 80% of its islands less than a meter above sea level. By 2075, rising seas could make large portions of the Maldives uninhabitable, contaminating freshwater sources and flooding homes, roads, and airports. Scientists warn that even small increases in sea level can have catastrophic consequences for this nation, where life is concentrated entirely on narrow strips of land. In a hypothetical disaster scenario, entire communities could be forced to relocate, and traditional ways of life, including fishing and local trade, could collapse. The government is exploring radical solutions like floating cities or massive seawalls, but such measures may only delay the inevitable. Tourists, who make up a large portion of the economy, could also decline sharply, impacting income and livelihoods. The Maldives serves as a stark example of how rising seas threaten national survival, not just property, in the coming decades. Shifting from water to heat, eastern China faces a different kind of threat. This densely populated region, home to hundreds of millions of people, could experience extreme temperature spikes by 2070. NASA climate models predict that heat waves could reach lethal wet bulb temperatures, where the combination of heat and humidity overwhelms the human body's ability to cool itself through sweating. A wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit is considered deadly if exposure lasts more than 6 hours. Cities such as Shanghai and Nanjing could see these extreme conditions on multiple days during peak summer months, making outdoor work dangerous and stressing energy systems. The intense heat could also disrupt agriculture, affecting food supply both locally and nationally. In this hypothetical scenario, millions might face reduced livability without massive technological adaptation, such as air conditioning or cooling shelters. Eastern China highlights how climate-driven heat, not just sea level rise, can render vast regions increasingly uninhabitable in the coming decades. Moving across the globe, northern South America, including parts of Brazil and Venezuela, faces an extreme heat challenge. By 2070, climate projections suggest this region could experience average temperatures similar to today's Sahara Desert. This is not just uncomfortable, it is dangerously outside the human climate niche where our species can safely live without technological aid. High humidity combined with soaring temperatures would make outdoor work nearly impossible and put enormous strain on power grids, water supplies, and public health systems. Cities like Manaus and Caracas could experience heat waves that regularly exceed the 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb threshold, putting residents at risk even with modern infrastructure. Agriculture could collapse in vulnerable areas, threatening local and global food security. Without major adaptation efforts, millions of people might be forced to relocate, creating one of the first large-scale, climate-driven migrations in the 21st century. Northern South America serves as a stark reminder that heat, not just rising seas, can make once thriving regions nearly unlivable. Shifting to the heart of a continent, Central Africa is facing a combination of population growth and extreme heat that could push it toward uninhabitability by 2070. Countries such as Nigeria, Cameroon, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo are projected to experience soaring temperatures that fall well outside the safe range for human survival, without modern cooling technology. Rapid population growth intensifies the problem, placing more people in regions where extreme heat could make daily life hazardous. For every 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature, studies estimate that roughly 1 billion people worldwide could face conditions close to unlivable. And Central Africa is particularly vulnerable. Agriculture, water access, and energy infrastructure would all face unprecedented stress, potentially triggering regional instability and food insecurity. Heat waves could become frequent, and even well-adapted urban centers may struggle to protect residents without massive investment in climate-resilient infrastructure. This region highlights how a lethal combination of climate and demographic pressures could create some of the world's first truly uninhabitable zones. Central Africa is a clear example that human survival depends on adaptation as much as geography. Moving to one of the hottest regions on Earth, the nations surrounding the Red Sea and Persian Gulf are projected to face extreme, potentially deadly heat by 2070. Cities such as Dubai, Doha, and Riyadh could regularly experience wet bulb temperatures exceeding 35 degrees Celsius, a threshold beyond which the human body cannot effectively cool itself through sweating. Even wealthy, air-conditioned cities would struggle to maintain safety outdoors during these peak heat events. This region combines high temperatures with high humidity, creating conditions that are exceptionally difficult for humans to endure. Outdoor work, traditional practices, and even daily activities could become life-threatening without technological support. Prolonged exposure during the hottest months might force societies to adapt by dramatically shifting schedules, relying on artificial cooling, or limiting outdoor activity. The Red Sea and Persian Gulf exemplify how climate extremes, even in economically advanced areas, could challenge habitability. These harsh conditions could make this region one of the earliest global hotspots where humans struggle to survive outside controlled environments. Next, we travel to the vast landscapes of northern Australia, a region already known for its harsh climate. By 2070, projections suggest that large portions of the Northern Territory and Queensland could face extreme heat that pushes well beyond the climate range humans have adapted to over millennia. Average summer temperatures could rival those of the Sahara, making outdoor work nearly impossible without significant technological support. Even though Australia is a developed nation with modern infrastructure, the intensity of this heat would put enormous stress on communities, agriculture, and energy systems. Farming, mining, and other essential industries that rely on outdoor labor could see productivity collapse during extreme heat periods. Ecosystems would also feel the pressure, with water sources drying faster and wildlife struggling to survive in increasingly hot conditions. Northern Australia serves as a stark example of how climate extremes could threaten habitability in parts of the developed world, not just in poorer nations. At the top of our countdown is the densely populated plains of South Asia, spanning parts of India and Pakistan. By 2070, climate models project that this region could regularly surpass the 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb temperature threshold during heat waves. This is the point where heat and humidity combine to make it impossible for the human body to cool itself through sweating, putting hundreds of millions of people at serious risk. The sheer density of the population in this region amplifies the challenge. Many communities rely on outdoor labor for agriculture, trade, and daily survival, making exposure to extreme heat unavoidable. Water scarcity is expected to worsen, and energy systems may struggle to meet the rising demand for cooling. In a worst-case high emissions scenario, nearly a third of the global population could face conditions outside the human climate niche by 2070, with India and Pakistan being among the hardest hit. South Asia represents the ultimate convergence of population, heat, and humidity, making it arguably the most urgent case for adaptation and mitigation strategies. While life will continue, the scale of the challenge underscores just how dramatically climate change could redraw the map of habitable regions. It is a sobering reminder that the clock is ticking, and the actions we take today will determine the habitability of these regions for generations to come. To understand the megastorms of the year 2075, we have to start with the foundation, Earth itself. Hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones are not random events. They are heat engines powered by the ocean. For decades, scientists have shown that as humans release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the majority of that extra heat is absorbed by the seas. In fact, more than 90% of global warming's excess energy ends up in the oceans. This is critical because warm water is the single most important ingredient for storm formation. It fuels the towering thunderstorms that spin up into cyclones. The warming ocean is not a uniform process. Some regions, like the Western Pacific and the Gulf of Mexico, are heating at faster rates than others. These hotspots are especially concerning because they already host some of the strongest tropical storms on record. When ocean surface temperatures climb just a degree or two higher than historical averages, the difference in storm potential is enormous. But temperature alone is not the only driver. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture. For roughly every 1 degree Celsius of warming, air can carry about 7% more water vapor. This means storms of the future will have access to a much larger supply of moisture to condense into rain. Scientists project that by mid-century, rainfall rates near the core of the most powerful storms could be 10 to 15% higher than today. The result would be flooding events of a scale that current infrastructure is simply not designed to withstand. Another crucial factor is the phenomenon known as rapid intensification. This occurs when a storm's wind Speeds increase dramatically in a very short period of time, sometimes by 50 miles per hour or more within just 24 hours. While such explosive growth has been relatively rare in the past, it is becoming more common as the oceans warm and the atmosphere becomes richer in moisture. By 2075, extreme rapid intensification is expected to be a defining feature of many storms that do form, making them harder to prepare for and far more dangerous. The physics behind this is simple. More heat and more water vapor mean more available energy. The climate system is not inventing new rules. It is simply working with a new set of conditions. And in this new environment, the storms are evolving into something fundamentally different. What were once rare monsters of wind and water could become the new normal by the middle of this century. By the year 2075, we may find ourselves in a strange paradox. Climate models suggest that the total number of tropical cyclones worldwide could actually decline by as much as 10 to 30%. At first glance, that might sound like good news: fewer storms, fewer disasters, right? But in reality, this quieter atmosphere sets the stage for something far more dangerous. The storms that do manage to form will not be ordinary. They will have to fight through tougher atmospheric conditions, and only the strongest will survive that gauntlet. But once they do, they will draw from oceans that are hotter than at any time in recorded history. That means the ones that reach maturity will have the potential to grow into superstorms of nearly unimaginable size and power. In this scenario, the familiar Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale may no longer be enough. Right now, Category 5 marks the peak, with sustained winds over 157 miles per hour. But by 2075, scientists believe there may be storms so intense that a new hypothetical Category 6 would be necessary, defined by winds above 192 miles per hour or more than 300 kilometers per hour. Several storms in recent decades have already brushed close to this threshold. In the future, it could become a terrifying reality. And wind is only one part of the equation. The destructive potential of a storm does not rise in a straight line. A storm with winds just 10% stronger can release exponentially more energy, shattering buildings, shredding power grids, and toppling infrastructure that once seemed indestructible. A single megastorm could wipe out decades of development in a matter of hours. Storm surge will add another layer of devastation. Rising seas driven by thermal expansion and melting ice sheets will amplify the push of water inland. By 2075, a superstorm striking a vulnerable coastline could send waves dozens of miles beyond the shore, inundating areas that have never before seen saltwater flooding. Entire neighborhoods, towns, and even cities could be erased from the map overnight. For those living inland, the threat will not disappear. With storms expanding in size, rainfall and winds will extend far beyond the coast. Mega storms could bring catastrophic flooding to river valleys, trigger deadly landslides in mountainous areas, and unleash tornado outbreaks as far as hundreds of miles from the ocean. In short, nowhere in the storm's vast footprint would be truly safe. In this hypothetical future, the idea of a hurricane season transforms into something else entirely. Long stretches of eerie calm will be shattered by the sudden arrival of one overwhelming storm. Storms so large and so violent that they define entire years or even decades of history. Coastal evacuation, once a temporary safety measure, could evolve into permanent migration, with millions forced to abandon the world's most vulnerable shorelines. This is the consequence of a hotter planet. Fewer storms overall, but those that do form will be monsters unlike anything humanity has ever faced. If storms by the year 2075 truly evolve into the megasystems we've imagined, then human survival will depend on adaptation at a scale we have never attempted before. In this hypothetical future, societies are forced to re-engineer the very way cities are built, how economies function, and even where populations live. Technology will be our first line of defense. Artificial intelligence, already a powerful tool in weather forecasting, could become the backbone of disaster prediction. By mid-century, advanced AI models may scan satellite, radar, and ocean data in real time, running millions of simulations within minutes. These systems could detect subtle atmospheric signals that hint at rapid intensification, giving communities a week or more of warning instead of just a few days. That extra time could mean the difference between orderly evacuation and total chaos. But forecasting alone will not keep people safe. Cities themselves will need to transform into resilient, storm-ready fortresses. Skyscrapers and homes may be constructed with aerodynamic curves to deflect extreme winds, anchored deep into bedrock to withstand surging seas. Entire districts might be elevated on platforms above projected flood levels, while surrounding wetlands and green belts are preserved or rebuilt to absorb excess rainfall. Urban planners talk about the rise of sponge cities, where permeable pavements, rooftop gardens, and vast reservoirs soak up water like a living shield. Critical infrastructure will also shift inland or underground. Power plants, data hubs, hospitals, and transportation links may be relocated far from coastlines. Energy grids will likely rely on decentralized systems, with solar, wind, and battery storage spread across regions to prevent a single failure from knocking out millions of homes. Some nations may even experiment with storm modification technologies, such as seeding clouds to disrupt intensification, though the ethics and risks of such interventions remain uncertain. For coastal communities that refuse or cannot afford to retreat, the adaptation may be even more drastic. Massive seawalls and surge barriers stretching for miles could rise to defend megacities like New York, Mumbai, or Manila. These structures would rival the scale of ancient wonders, engineered not for beauty but for survival against storms that push seawater farther inland than ever before. Yet not all adaptation will be physical. Social systems will have to evolve as well. Insurance industries may collapse under the weight of constant multi-billion-dollar disasters, forcing governments to establish new forms of disaster financing. Migration policies will need to handle climate refugees in the tens of millions, as entire regions slowly surrender to the advancing seas. And education systems may train future generations not just in mathematics and science, but in resilience, preparation, and survival strategies for life in a storm-dominated world. This imagined future is not inevitable, but it is one possible response to the terrifying scale of megastorms. Humanity has shown resilience before, but by 2075, resilience will no longer be optional. It will be the foundation of survival. As we imagine the year 2075, the forecast is both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The era of more frequent but smaller storms seems likely to give way to rarer, yet unimaginably powerful megastorms. These storms could span hundreds of miles, with winds exceeding any historical records and rainfall capable of reshaping entire regions. Coastal cities, floodplains, and even inland areas will feel their impact, permanently altering landscapes and economies. The choices humanity makes today will determine whether this scenario remains hypothetical or edges closer to reality, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, transitioning to renewable energy, and enforcing smart urban planning can slow the warming that fuels these storms. Without decisive action, the storms of 2075 may no longer be confined to projections. They could define the lived reality of billions. Science and technology offer hope. By mid-century, AI-driven forecasting, climate-resilient infrastructure, and innovative engineering may allow communities to anticipate and survive storms that today would be catastrophic. Imagine early warning systems so precise that entire cities can evacuate safely days in advance, or skyscrapers built to withstand winds over 300 kilometers per hour. Yet even with these advances, the social and economic pressures of frequent megastorms will challenge governments, economies, and individuals alike. Education and global cooperation will also be key. People will need training in emergency preparedness, and nations will need agreements to assist those displaced by storm surges and floods. The concept of a storm-proof city may become commonplace, while migration plans and disaster funds could become part of national security strategies. The human ability to adapt will be tested like never before. Ultimately, the world of 2075 could be shaped less by the storms themselves and more by how humanity responds. While the destructive potential of these megastorms is staggering, so too is our capacity for innovation, planning, and resilience. This hypothetical future shows us both a warning and an opportunity to respect the power of nature, anticipate its extremes, and prepare wisely before it's too late. In the end, the megastorms of 2075 will not just challenge our buildings and infrastructure, they will challenge our imagination, our policies, and our willingness to act. The question is not if they will come, but whether we are ready when they do. Picture this: the year is 2075 and the world is waking up to a crisis far greater than any oil shortage. Water, the most essential resource for life, has become the new currency of power. Nations that once shared rivers and lakes now watch upstream neighbors like hawks, wary of every dam, reservoir, or diversion. The struggle for water is no longer a distant worry. It is a daily reality for billions. The roots of these conflicts trace back decades. Climate change is altering the global water cycle, causing extreme droughts in some regions and catastrophic flooding in others. Glaciers in the Himalayas, the water towers of Asia, are shrinking at an unprecedented rate, threatening the rivers that supply over 1 billion people. Meanwhile, population growth continues at an astonishing pace, with the global population projected to reach nearly 10 billion by the middle of the century. More people means more water is needed for drinking, agriculture, and industry. Agriculture alone consumes around 70% of all fresh water, making it the largest single driver of demand. On top of this, geopolitics is adding fuel to the fire. Over 3 billion people rely on water that crosses national borders. When an upstream country builds a dam or diverts a river, it gains a powerful lever over downstream neighbors. These shared resources are now high-stakes instruments of political and economic influence. Small disagreements over water allocation have the potential to escalate into regional crises, turning rivers into flashpoints for tension and instability. By 2075, these pressures are set to converge, creating the perfect storm for conflicts over water that could reshape international relations entirely. Our timeline of water conflicts begins on the banks of the world's longest river, the Nile. For thousands of years, Egypt has depended on the Nile for over 90% of its fresh water. It is not just a resource, it is a lifeline, woven into the nation's culture, agriculture, and survival. But by 2075, this vital artery is under unprecedented pressure. The flashpoint is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD. Ethiopia inaugurated the dam in September of 2025, Africa's largest hydroelectric project. For Ethiopia, it is a symbol of national progress, designed to double the country's electricity output and lift millions out of poverty. Yet for Egypt, the dam represents an existential threat. Its reservoir allows Ethiopia to control the flow of the Blue Nile, a crucial source of water during increasingly frequent droughts. Sudan, positioned between the two nations, faces its own challenges, balancing potential benefits from regulated floods against the risk of being caught in the middle of escalating tensions. As the climate warms, the Nile's seasonal patterns are becoming unpredictable. Years of drought could leave Egypt and Sudan at the mercy of upstream decisions, while intense rains could overflow reservoirs and cause catastrophic flooding. Diplomatic negotiations have stalled, with Egypt appealing to international bodies and Ethiopia insisting on its sovereign right to use the river. By 2075, this standoff is a clear illustration of how shared water resources can turn into geopolitical tinder, a single flashpoint capable of sparking a broader regional crisis. From the Nile, we turn to South Asia, where water conflicts intersect with some of the most dangerous military arsenals on the planet. The Indus River Basin, shared by nuclear-armed rivals India and Pakistan, has long been a delicate balance of cooperation and tension, but by 2075, that balance is fraying. The Indus Waters Treaty, signed in 1960, once provided a stable framework. India controls the 3 eastern rivers, while Pakistan depends on the 3 western rivers for over 80% of its agricultural water. However, decades of population growth, industrialization, and glacial retreat have pushed the basin to the brink. In April of 2025, India suspended key treaty provisions, citing national security concerns after a regional escalation in Kashmir. By withholding critical data on river flows and flood forecasts, India gained leverage that could dramatically affect Pakistan's water supply. The consequences are severe, with millions depending on irrigation and drinking water. Even short-term reductions in river flow could spark famine, mass migrations, and internal unrest. Both nations now face a terrifying calculus. Any misstep could trigger direct conflict. In this future scenario, water is no longer merely a resource. It's a potential weapon, capable of shaping the geopolitics of the 21st century and beyond. The Indus Basin exemplifies how scarcity, climate change, and nuclear-armed neighbors combine into a volatile and high-stakes risk. While South Asia faces nuclear-tinged water tensions, other regions show how upstream control can become a tool of geopolitical dominance. In Southeast Asia, the Mekong River stretches over 4,000 kilometers, flowing through China, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. By 2075, China's upstream position has allowed it to construct at least 11 massive dams, controlling the flow to downstream nations. These dams not only generate electricity, but also dictate water availability, impacting agriculture, fisheries, and drinking supplies across multiple countries. Downstream nations like Cambodia and Vietnam have faced unprecedented droughts, while sudden water releases from the dams have caused destructive floods, illustrating the immense leverage held by the upstream state. In the Middle East, a similar dynamic unfolds along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which run through Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Turkey's extensive dam-building projects upstream have reduced water flows to its neighbors by more than 50% in some areas. Agriculture has been devastated, and entire communities face displacement as fertile lands dry up. Some Iraqi officials warn that parts of the Euphrates could run nearly dry by 2040, intensifying competition over the remaining resources. These examples highlight how water scarcity, when combined with strategic infrastructure control, becomes a powerful weapon, reshaping regional politics and threatening stability across entire river basins. The stage is set, upstream nations hold the keys, and downstream populations live at their mercy. The final stage of this hypothetical scenario is where tensions turn explosive. Water scarcity alone doesn't automatically trigger war, but in the 21st century, the stakes are higher than ever. Upstream nations control dams and reservoirs, while downstream populations face dwindling supplies, failed crops, and mass migrations. When diplomacy stalls, economic measures often follow. Trade restrictions, sanctions, and threats that destabilize governments and create internal unrest. In some regions, the disruption reaches military levels. Attacks on water infrastructure, dams, pipelines, and treatment facilities become tools of coercion. A single strike can devastate a city's drinking supply or flood farmland, producing immediate humanitarian crises without ever firing a traditional weapon. In the most extreme cases, countries might mobilize troops along rivers, guarding strategic water points or seizing control of critical infrastructure. By 2075, such scenarios could affect billions, with conflicts flaring from Africa to South Asia, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. The consequences are global. Forced migrations increase, economies shrink, and international alliances are tested. While open war over water may be less common than forced cooperation, experts agree scarcity heightens the risk of both cross-border and internal violence. The rivers that sustain life may define the borders of tomorrow's conflicts, and the question for humanity becomes not if, but where the first major water confrontation will erupt.